Okay, so I'm going to talk about our focus topic for today, and I'm going to I'm not going to get into the specifics of all of the proposals that are out there now. We're going to just sort of talk about the bigger picture of what's going on, and this is a bit of a a large development in terms of how many parties are getting in on the federal milk marketing order reform process with petitions, and it's going to be a big proceeding, and it's going to go on for quite a while. And so I just want to talk about sort of the administrative aspects of it without getting too deep into the details of what people are proposing. I'm just going to show you a little bit of what these two screens are. Can you go back one, Audrey, for 1 sec? Yeah, okay. Just to know where you can look at some of the things that we're going to talk about here today is under research by topic in our on our website. There we have these virtual resource rooms, which are essentially collections of resources on broader topics, and we have one called Dairy and Dairy Products Law. There's the link to it up above on the top of the screen, and then next slide. And then when you get in there, this is what it looks like on the home page. And by the way, somebody asked a question: has the CLE form been sent yet? I don't know. Jackie Schweikler will go ahead and put that in the chat, I believe, or Audrey, maybe it's in there. Okay, I think it's coming in. When you open up the virtual resource room for Dairy and Dairy Products Law, you'll see a menu options in this dark blue. And of course, we're under the price regulation federal portion. So just put a little star there so you know which portion to go to. But we got all kinds of stuff in here in this virtual resource room. And so be our guest. Please come over and take a look at it. All right, next slide. All right, everybody's familiar with the federal milk marketing order system for the most part, or if you aren't, I'm going to keep this at a fairly rudimentary level. So these are the 11 federal milk marketing orders that cover the milk market sheds, or the marketing the country, and of course there are some areas of the country that do not have a order applicable in them, as you see from the white areas. And then of course we have 11 here, and our newest one several years into it, which is California. So the application for it now. So we have, as most people are aware, of course, and we've talked about it in the in this series before, and we have several developments that occurred in this most recent because they are talking not just sort of a regional focus on a particular issue that might be impacting one part of the country. This is requests for amending all 11 orders at once. This is fairly rare that this on this type of a scale, it's probably once a decade, or once every 2 decades perhaps, that we get something on the magnitude of what's being talked about now. So this all started in March, when the National Milk Producers Federation, the leading trade organization for milk producer co-ops, went with their board's approval to go ahead and file a fairly comprehensive set of milk marketing order reforms. However, there was a bit of delay then between March and May 1st, where it did not get filed right away. And there was it was a little odd because when it was all announced, it was going to be filed imminently, and then it did not happen. One of the reasons that it appears not to have happened is that when it was being formulated, IDFA, International Dairy Foods Association, the leading trade organization for milk processors, the original intent was that they were going to file together. And there was an attempt to try to work out some type of a joint request. Well, that did not go as planned. In fact, it's led to a bit of a falling out there. So that really was seems to be, although I'm not on the inside, the reason why National Milk's petition took a bit longer than anticipated to be filed. This is a laundry list of the things that they had in their petition, or I should say, this was actually the laundry list of what the board had approved and what their translation of it. The bottom line is multiple changes, some of which are very familiar and have been talked about for years. The returning to the higher of calculation in the class 1 mover, which may be completely Greek to you. That's fine. Essentially, what that is talking about is that in 2018 Farm Bill, there was a direct change in the essentially in the federal milk marketing order minimum price calculation that essentially did not, in fact, it's not that it just didn't fulfill the intent, it actually caused an extremely negative effect, which most people are familiar with, which is these very sizable negative producer price differentials, which essentially meant a drastically lower uniform milk price after all the calculations were completed in the federal milk marketing system, which has an advanced price and then sort of a truing up process that occurs after the period at issue is concluded. And the bottom line is what was done in the 2018 Farm Bill needs to be reversed, or the request is to reverse that and go back to exactly what it was before, which is called the average of rather than higher of. Again, you don't need to understand those things. Just know that what was done in the 2018 Farm Bill that backfired it is being requested to be completely and totally reversed back to the way things used to be. Probably a lesson in why you should go through this formal process and file a petition and have hearings rather than do this by, an 11th hour negotiation in the Farm Bill. In any event, also discontinuing the use of barrel cheese in the component pricing. And again, you don't need to understand component pricing just to know that the complaint has always been that barrels of cheese are no longer the standard, and it's not how cheese is traded on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And it's essentially it's boxes, not barrels, and that this was not a reliable way to pull the or to contribute to the component pricing, just to use what's traded as barrels. And so that's been something talked about for a long time. I'll go forward again. Not want to get into the specifics of these. I want to talk about sort of the big picture and what we're looking at here. But know that there's a slide in here that goes through them. Okay, next slide. Now, the issue here is that, or one of the oddities here is that while we were waiting for the National Milk Petition to be filed, the International Dairy Foods Association, IDFA, who essentially this idea of a joint petition with National Milk, along with the Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association, went ahead and filed a petition first. So they got their own petition in at the end of March. And that was a petition that was just limited to some very specific issues in the price calculation in the federal milk marketing orders, which is these make allowance factor into the price what it takes to make X amount of product from X amount of milk, and depending on what product it is. And so it's a make allowance, in other words, an allowance for making the product, the processor's costs. And a lot of the data that has been used to establish the current make allowances is old, outdated, not uniformly and consistently collected. And so I think everyone universally understands or is of the same mind that this process for the make allowances has got to become regularly and robustly monitored, data collected, and revised. So I don't think there's a lot of disagreement over that. How to do it is another thing. And IDFA is sort of keeping themselves on that track and not wanting to go beyond that to endorse other ideas. Okay, so they got theirs in first, then National Milks came after on May 1. Next slide. Okay, so on June 1st is when USDA did in fact do the official commencement of the hearing process on these, what was at that time, essentially 3 petitions. 2 were more or less identical, the 2 with regard to the make allowance and then the National Milk petition. So it was an action plan, which is exactly what the regs call it, that the USDA put forth. And the action plan was that USDA announced that, okay, we've received these petitions. We are going to consider a rulemaking process, which would be a series of hearings and the publication of a decision, and then comment on that decision, et cetera, which we'll go through in a minute. And they went ahead and scheduled some things, which is a deadline of June 14th for anybody else that had a petition they wanted to be filed to file them. And there was going to be a virtual pre-hearing information session with those who had filed petitions on June 16th. That in fact happened. And they announced that by the end of this month, sometime very shortly in the next, coming days, the next 10 days or so, USDA anticipated that they would be publishing, if they decided to go ahead with a hearing proceeding now, that they would be publishing those that notice of hearing within the next 10 to 12 days, and that the tentative date for when those hearings would start would be August 23rd, and that they would occur in Indianapolis, Indiana. So that's where we are after the June 16 informational session with USDA and the petitioners. Now, next slide. Here now is the full slate of all those who joined in and filed additional petitions and then actually filed revisions of those petitions. So the bottom line is, since the June 16 conference, everything was due, or anybody who had a petition needed to get it filed by June 20th. 10 different petitions were filed, the ones that we already knew about, and then 8 additional ones, essentially. Actually, no, I think that would be 7 because IDFA went from 1 to 2. So the bottom line is, we knew about I guess we knew maybe it's 6 additional ones because we knew about 4 of them previously. So the bottom line is, American Farm Bureau filed one, California Dairy Campaign, which is California Farmers Union, I guess, Cedar Grove Cheese, Dairy Pricing Association Inc., Edge, a large cooperative in the Midwest, Milk Innovation Group, which is essentially a group of processors, or at least they service processors, National All Jersey Inc. And so now we have this large gang of petitioners here, all of whom apparently are going to have their petitions considered in one gigantic joint proceeding. So this is not going to be a simple, day or 2 or 3 of hearings starting on August 23rd. This is a thing that's going to go on for quite a long time. So if in fact the August 23rd date is the kickoff of the first day of hearings, we will be hearing very shortly, when the hearing notice is published, how they intend to handle and schedule all of the subsequent dates that will be necessary to hear this giant federal milk marketing order reform proceeding. So this is now a large administrative proceeding that is going to be going on for multiple hearings over many months and will be, I'm sure, to some degree, dominating certain portions of the ag media. And you're going to be hearing a ton about it. Okay, next slide. This is a very nice resource to look at if you really want to delve into the depths of what exactly is being requested and what the impact would be. This is American Farm Bureau's Market Intel column. And Dan Munch, who's their current, I think he's their chief economist, wrote a two-part article called Tracking FMMO Policy Developments. It's from American Farm Bureau's perspective. In other words, their petition, because they are now a petitioner, is the highlight of it, but it provides a lot of good other detail. And again, you don't have to understand the detail of some of what's being discussed to get the general flavor of what's going on. This is the best resource that I have seen with regard to sort of an analysis of what National Milk had put on the table in their petition, and then some of the things that Farm Bureau has to say about that and how they might look at it slightly differently. Very, very, very well done, as the American Farm Bureau's Market Intel column always is. That's included in here because I just thought it would be very helpful. And again, since we talked about the negative consequences of this 2018 amendment that was made in the minimum price, the federal minimum price calculation, this graph gives you the period of time. It's showing across the bottom, shows you when we had these really abnormal markets that led to these very, very, very low milk prices because of these blue bars that you see go below a certain line there. There you go. Somebody's using the cursor. And so there's our period when massive losses were suffered. Next slide, we'll get into that a little bit closer. Okay, this shows you the cumulative total of the losses due to that change that was made in the 2018 Farm Bill that changed this calculation from the average of to the higher of, and resulted in all of this market disruption and havoc. The cumulative total of the losses, the major area where the losses essentially became lesser on a continuing basis was right in here where you see November and then December of 2020, where things kind of leveled off and the losses were, the bleeding was stopping a bit. Now you can see as time has gone on since December 2020, the bleeding has started again to some degree. And so particularly at the tail end of 2022 into the beginnings of 2023, now the cumulative loss from this one change that was made in the 2018 Farm Bill, which is really driving all federal milk market, had this not occurred, is a negative 918 million. And again, the area that the Pandemic Market Volatility Assistance Program addressed was only losses between July and December of 2020. So no compensation for the losses that have been suffered, particularly lately, but at any time since December of 2020. And so just gives you a flavor for, yes, there was a large program of hundreds of millions. Was it enough? No, it was not. Okay, next slide. All right. Now, when was the last marketing order amendment meeting? All the time. Table, well over 10 years longer. And probably more like 20 years or so, probably going back to, I don't know the exact date, but when component pricing came into being, which again, if you don't understand that, that's okay. What's going on here? Now, this act just in the federal was published a proposed decision, which is called a proposed rule, but it is a decision on a amendment petition that was filed for a it's called this Transportation Credit Balancing Fund in just particular Southeast and Appalachian. The actually in Florida. And in fact, Harrisburg's Shore is counsel on this particular petition. And so today, this very day, was the Federal Register publication of a proposed decision in another amendment proceeding, obviously of a much smaller scope. But they are going on all the time. Next slide. This gives you an idea. This is a little picture, a little cut, a little image of pulled off of the USDA Ag Marketing Service website, and this is for federal milk marketing order national hearings. In other words, this is what they have available. It's not the most well organized, but in any event, it shows you these are national hearings or petitions that were requesting hearings that were of a national scope in the last, let's say, there's more. If you go on the page, I just am showing you an image of the very top. There were some petitions for changes in 06, 07. There was some actually formula hearings. There was some 2000, some 2003, 2005, et cetera. And so, and then there was some 2012 activity. So if you go on the AMS website, you will see a bit of information about past national, in other words, petitions that had nationwide scope. Next slide. This shows you regional amendments that have been requested, including the one that we just talked about. I believe is in here, or it might be off this. It's probably down below this. In other words, I didn't have enough room to put all of them on there. So the bottom line is this sort of shows you that, on the regional basis, not just the nationwide scope, there are relatively frequent amendment petitions and proceedings that do go on, and you can research them on AMS's website. Next slide. Now, this shows you the homepage for this particular proceeding that was all started by National Milk and IDFA. And this just shows you the most recent filings. And this is the same 10 petitions that we saw on the previous slide. But I just wanted to give people there's the link down in the bottom left-hand corner. You can go there and look at all of the materials and what's currently pending. And this is where you track these current proceedings as they go forward. It's all going to appear in essentially most recent activity on top. And so this is where you track what's happening now. Next slide. Now, all of this is being done pursuant to the Agricultural Marketing Agreement Act of 1937. So you can imagine anytime you're dealing with an act of that age, that you are dealing with something that is quite dusty and is quite jam-packed with just amendment after amendment after amendment over the years, decades worth of things that have made this act almost impossible to read in any kind of a coherent way, because it has been, altered in so many different ways over the years. And so the bottom line is just be aware that, in fact, the federal milk marketing orders that exist are still being issued pursuant to a 1937 law that has been, it is really a Frankenstein in the sense that it has had so much amendment to it that it's really difficult to read. And that's going to explain to you why I am using some other sources later. So go to the next slide. These are the Administrative Procedures Act provisions and that's the entire Administrative Procedures Act under federal law. And Somebody's asking, was the CLE word posted? No. If you weren't here during the time that it was read or the time that I announced it, it was marketing order. That is the code word. Okay. Administrative Procedures Act is the federal act that governs, agency proceedings of this nature. My days at the PDA, for example, the administrative code that governs administrative proceedings for the state agencies was, of course, a very, very familiar thing to all of us who work as government attorneys. So next slide. I guess one thing I'll say to you is, going through the Administrative Procedures Act was not really helpful to explaining to you the amendment process. And so again, I'm going to show you a little bit more about that in a second. Tells you how, or shows you how the Department of Ag's, the USDA's regulations are set up to accommodate the federal milk marketing orders. In other words, the orders are issued as administrative orders by the secretary after administrative proceedings, and then they are in fact essentially lodged the repository, or they're promulgated, whatever word you want to use. They then appear in the USDA's regulations themselves. Under the AMS portion, which is Chapter 10 of USDA's regulations, is the Ag Marketing Service, and then this shows you the CFR parts that correspond to each federal milk marketing order. So you need to get an order and understand where to go to get it. This is how you do it. Now, but you'll see that between, like, what is it, part 1001 and 1135, you have the 11 milk marketing orders, and then you also have part 1000, which is the general provisions for all federal milk marketing orders. Next slide. And there's a link across the top that you can take that to go there if you ever need to. All right, now this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to use a brochure, and this is because the statute and the regs are too confusing to go through because of all the years of amendments to the statute and the general nature of the Administrative Procedures Act. This is actually the best source to explain to somebody, how do you go about amending a milk marketing order? Now, this little pamphlet actually does a decent job of it. Since most of us are attorneys and we're here to get CLEs, I'll just say that I'm not going to go over all of this, except understand that there is a sort of truncated informal rulemaking process for amending a federal milk marketing order that can be followed if the milk marketing order does not affect milk prices. So if you see under informal rulemaking here, it says for provisions that do not directly affect milk prices, USDA may elect to use informal rulemaking procedures to amend a milk marketing order. And it's certainly much shorter. And essentially, they break it down as a three-step process. USDA recognizes that a regulation needs to be issued or changed by whatever method, correspondence to the secretary, petitions that the secretary decides to handle in this way, whatever it may be. Number two, USDA publishes it as a proposed rule and provides time for public comment. Number two. And number three, USDA considers all the comments and issues a final rule. So they can, or I should say, federal milk marketing orders can be amended essentially in the exact same way that regulations are amended. And therefore, essentially dispensing with the Administrative Procedures Act process if it does not affect milk prices, is the qualifier on that, which, of course, is not anything that we're talking about now. We are definitely talking about milk prices. So, but that just wanted the people to know that that is a way to amend here. All right, next slide. Now, here is the process laid out in this brochure style which is, and as attorneys, some of us might scoff at this kind of thing, but this actually does a decent job of walking people through it. Essentially, you file a proposal, as has been done in here. USDA has various time limits within which to respond, and they have to complete the hearings within 120 days. That's why we're talking about this August hearing date, because they were somewhat under the gun. And then they publish a notice of a hearing. That is what we're waiting for. That is what is supposed to happen by the end of July. Number 3, the proponents request USDA data. This is basically discovery. So the proponents need to get in their requests for data sets from USDA in order to essentially make their case for the amendment. And that is sort of a pre-hearing process. And it cuts off at 10 days prior to the start of the hearing. Something just happened to my screen. Hopefully you're still hearing me and seeing me okay. Okay, number 4 in the process is, the submission of witness testimony. Number 5 is the conduct of the hearings. Number 6, making the record available to the public within 2 weeks. This is amazing. This government is not a big fan, at least when I was in government, of restricting itself through its regulatory or through its own regulations. But in this one, USDA has really made it tough on itself with the timetables that they have created here. 2 weeks to get the transcripts out there. And then parties file corrections if there are any needed to the transcripts, which is due in 30 days. Then the post-hearing briefing goes on, not to exceed 60 days after completion of the hearing. So this is a really tight time frame. So for the participants, this is tight. Now, will there be allowances granted to extend some of these times? Very well, maybe. Then number 9 in the step process is a recommended decision. That is somewhat like what we just saw published in the Federal Register today that I had on the prior slide. And the a recommended decision needs to be not later than 90 days after the submission of the post-hearing briefs. Then the parties do the usual process of filing exceptions or comments to the recommended decision. Ultimately, it's a recommended decision for the secretary to adopt. The administrative law judge that will preside over the hearing process will be the author of it. And then that's a 60-day window for that. Then there's the final decision, which is again 60 days after the deadline for the submission of the comments and exceptions. So again, this thing is a bit of a rocket docket for something that may in fact be this large in scope. I mean, you got 10 petitions and they are extremely detailed and complex. And then if in fact we get all through that entire process and the secretary issues the final decision, then that will be essentially a decision that as proposed to be amended, the milk marketing order will now be put to a referendum vote of producers. And if it fails, the entire order goes away. It's not as if it fails, you just stay where you were and it stays at the status quo. So this is a precarious, slippery slope to go down, because if in fact the secretary puts forth a collection of reforms to all 11 federal milk marketing orders, and these referendum votes do not adopt those, there's no order then in its place. So that is extremely troubling to this entire process. And, this is why it only happens once every, couple of decades on this kind of a scale. If in fact the producers adopt it, then it is published as a final rule in the Federal Register, and it essentially becomes part of the regulations of USDA AMS. Okay, next slide, please. All right, now that's the amendment process. What about how to create a marketing order itself? That is also something on which USDA has a rather handy dandy little set of steps that they have on their website, which is, again, because of the complexity of the way the statute and the general nature of the Administrative Procedures Act, it's best to rely on these as the sources for understanding the process, and then going backwards, if you're as an attorney and looking up individual specific items, but covering, I needed to have something more handy than that to go over today. So next slide. This is the process for there is this slide, and then there is I think maybe 4 more steps on the next slide. This is the process for creating an order from scratch. These are marketing orders. These are different and need to be distinguished in your mind from promotional checkoff type program. Those are research or promotional orders. This is a marketing order. This is a mandatory, and it's not, based on the collection of some assessment. This is a mandatory handling of this commodity that not only the producers will have to sign off on by their vote, but then the parties that handle that commodity for them, in this case, the processors, will need to essentially agree, and they sign a marketing agreement. That's actually why the act is called the Marketing Agreement Act of 1937, which once assigned essentially becomes a mandatory obligation. And that's how the present federal milk marketing orders operate. And so I'm not going to go into detail due to our time constraints. Go ahead, next slide. Just know that here is the process for going through, and it's not necessarily all that different than the amendment process, honestly. And if you're in any way familiar with the way Pennsylvania's system goes for the promotional orders, like the Apple Marketing Board or the Vegetable Marketing Board, Wine Marketing Board, et cetera, same process. Okay, next slide. Okay, leave a little bit of time if we have any questions. Now, are there questions, Audrey, in the chat, or is there?
I have not received any questions. If anyone wants to throw anything in the chat, we're happy to stick around and
okay. Hey, we might actually conclude on time, which is a miracle for me. I don't think I've ever done that before. Let's go back one slide for a second, Audrey.
Sure.
One thing that I want to point out to people is on the creation of a new program. And this is a familiar provision because Pennsylvania also has this with regard to its research and promotion programs, is to adopt the new program. The vote has to be yes from 2/3 of the producers who vote, and it's 2/3 by number or by volume. So in other words, the big players like the DFAs of the world carry an extremely large amount of clout in this vote because they're actually voting their volume. And the same with, the large, cooperatives in California, et cetera. So far, I do not believe that any of these petitions have attempted to let's say, attack or alter the idea that a cooperative votes on behalf of its members. In other words, it votes all of its members numerically. The cooperative casts those votes for them unless they in some way, shape, or form opt out, I believe is how it works. And they have to, that's between them and their cooperative, that they don't wish to have the cooperative exercise their vote. I don't think anyone's attacked that has been a source of much controversy over the years. And, people have not liked that provision, but I don't think anyone's petitioning to try to do away with that. Let's just put it that way. So with that being said, it is 1 o'clock. I hope you picked up a little bit about what we're about to head into here. This is going to be a 1.5 years, 2 years or more that we're going to be engrossed in this. So I think the procedure and understanding the bigger picture is important. And so hopefully you picked up a little of that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Brooke, for sharing with us today. Everyone, that concludes our program. Our next Dairy Quarterly webinar will be in October. We'll have information out soon about that. And then our next Center webinar will be on July 28th. It's a Friday. It will be on USDA commodity programs. So we hope you'll join us there. Find more information about all of that on our website. So thanks everyone so much. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye.